Hello, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Caroline Kende-Robb. I'm the Executive Director of the Africa Progress Panel. Thank you all for coming this afternoon to the launch of the Africa Progress Report 2015, Grain, Fish, Money, Financing Africa's Green and Blue Revolutions. Africa is attracting ever greater interest all around the world as the continent is slowly becoming more influential demographically, politically and economically. The Africa Progress Panel, which consists of 10 distinguished individuals, has an important role to play in discussions around topics that relate to Africa's present and future. The panel is intellectually and politically independent, but shares a belief that we all benefit from an Africa that is prosperous, stable and fair. Our panel members advocate for policies which move Africa in that direction. They volunteer their time and serve on a panel in their personal capacity. I am therefore very pleased to introduce 4 of our panel members who are here with us today. Our chair, Mr. Kofi Annan, Mr. Tidjane Tian, who is the CEO of Prudential, Mr. Bob Geldof, CBE, musician, businessman, and founder and chair of Band Aid, Live Aid, and Live 8, and Mr. Peter Eigen, founder of Transparency International and special representative of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. The panel's recent report should be seen as a series of interlocking publications. Last year's report looked at the continent's oil, gas, and mining sectors. And in 2012, we looked at jobs, justice, and equity. They all celebrate many of the successes across the continent. Africa is a wealthy continent, but the wealth is not benefiting enough of its people. Growth, prosperity, innovation, and energy are surging through the continent, transforming Africa into a global player from finance through to films, through to fashion. But our reports do not dwell on an Africa rising narrative. The panel strives to narrate a more balanced story, shining a light on tough issues. This year's report looks at agriculture in the context of inequality, injustice, but also opportunity and immense potential. Potential just waiting to be tapped. The global media has devoted a heavy amount of space to inequality issues in the past few weeks and months. Inequality is a critical global issue. In Africa, this inequality is a serious drag on poverty reduction, human development, and growth. It is preventing the growth with transformation that is urgently needed. Our panel members will elaborate on these issues and look at the report's focus on agriculture investment and growth. This report is a huge collaborative effort. We've worked closely with think tanks, multilateral and regional organizations across the globe and across Africa. But I want to say a quick special thank you to all the African think tanks who we have worked with in the last year, and a very special thank you to Kevin Watkins and his team at the Overseas Development Institute based here in London. And thank you all for coming this afternoon. Just a very quick comment on the format of today's press launch. Mr. Annan will make some very short remarks, and then we'll open for questions and comments from the floor. Given the very limited time that we have available, the panel will only answer questions that are related to the Africa Progress Report. And during the question and answer session, it would be great if you could kindly say who you are and where you're from. And please kindly keep your questions as short as possible. Thanks. I would now like to pass over to Mr. Annan, who will give us some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. My voice is a bit gone. First of all, I'm very pleased to see all of you here at this lunch of this year's Africa Progress Panel report. We have all, I'm sure, been watching Africa's impressive growth recently, and with fascination. The average incomes have risen by 1/3, and exports are booming and foreign investments are on the rise. This progress is laudable. However, there are disturbing increases in inequality and poverty, which we should also be concerned about. After all, Africa is a continent of great wealth. It has an abundant wealth of natural and human resources. Despite this wealth, Africa's share of global poverty, malnutrition, and child deaths are continuing to rise. It doesn't have to be this way. As we demonstrate in the report, grain, fish, money, finance in Africa's green and blue revolutions, Africa's political leaders today have an extraordinary opportunity to guide their nations on better, fairer growth paths. To reduce poverty faster and inequality too, African governments must boost their agriculture and fisheries sector. It is precisely these two sectors where a vast majority of Africans are working, predominantly as smallholder farmers. These sectors are still woefully underperforming, underfinanced, and has very little interest for most governments. Low productivity, chronic underinvestment, and regional protectionism means that Africa must import too much of its food, as much as $35 billion in 2011. This is an opportunity that could have been afforded to the African farmers to produce for their local market. And we hope, and as we do recommend in the report, good infrastructure, increase in intra-African trade would also offer them great opportunities. When Africa's leaders decide to invest time, effort, and money, then they will see quick growth in the agricultural sectors. With the launch of this year's Africa Progress Report, we are calling on African governments to roll out a uniquely African green revolution. The global community must also play its part. It must certainly tackle issues of tax avoidance and evasion, which takes a heavy toll on all of us, particularly those in Africa. As we show in this report and in last year's report, the global community must also tackle the issue of anonymous company ownership, which continues to facilitate corruption. This year, we cast a spotlight on plunder of Africa's forest and ocean resources, which also takes a toll. Illicit logging cost Africa $17 billion a year. And in Africa's coastal waters, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing has reached epidemic proportions. This plunder destroys entire coastal communities when they lose the opportunities to catch, process, and trade. Commercial trawlers that operate under flags of convenience and unload in ports that do not record their catch are engaging in organized theft disguised as commerce. That is why our report calls for a multilateral fisheries regime that imposes sanctions on fishing vessels that do not report their catches. If we do nothing to stop the plunder, then we are all going to suffer the consequences. Not today, perhaps, but tomorrow and the day after that. We are all losing money through natural resource plunder and financial mismanagement. Africans are shortchanged on money transfers from abroad. The continent loses an estimated $1.885 billion a year because money transfer operators are imposing excessive charges on remittances. This type of issue should be investigated by financial regulators such as the UK's Financial Conduct Authority to protect African citizens against restrictive business practices. Africa is at the crossroads. Every day, throughout our continent, Africans prove time and again their resilience and creativity. If the right environment is created and the right incentives are offered, I think it will unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of the young Africans who can use their dynamic talents and creativity to ensure that Africa develops and that we create a truly prosperous, stable, and a fair continent. If Africa's leaders act now to reduce poverty and inequality, invest in their agriculture and fisheries, and protect their people, they can leave a legacy of justice, prosperity, and peace. I think I will pause here and we'll take your questions.
Many thanks, Mr. Annan. Okay, if you don't mind raising your hand if you have a question, and we've got a couple of people with mics in the room, so they will run and give you a mic. And if you can kindly just keep your questions short and say who you are and where you're from. Yes, sir.
I'm Henry Bonsu, a radio and television broadcaster. I was fortunate
Radio
enough,
what?
Radio and television broadcaster and conference host occasionally. I was fortunate enough to attend the high-level panel meeting for Global Development Corporation in Mexico City, and a number of African governments were represented there. And they talked about the kinds of things you've just emphasized now, but they say they don't have the capacity in certain key areas. For example, domestic resource mobilization. They can't take on these companies that are doing transfer prices. So the likes of the OECD and other development partners were saying, well, then aid should change, and we should help boost the capacity of these countries in these areas instead of doing traditional aid. Mm-hmm. Do you agree that it needs to change now, especially post-2015?
Yeah.
Do you want to take a few and then... Should I take a few, or do you want to do one-on-one? How would you feel?
Yeah, we can take it.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, please, in the front here.
I speak quite loud, so...
I think, it sounds like you do, but I'm sorry, I needed to have the mic because we're recording as well. Thank you.
My name is Sophie Chandauka from Virgin Money, but I am from Zimbabwe. My question is around the agriculture point. And so it's not a secret that in Zimbabwe we have many problems that have occurred as a result of the land redistribution issue. And you make a point about the right environment and an entrepreneurial spirit. What are your own views about how our governments can responsibly deal with matters relating to land and redistribution and not kill entrepreneurial spirit?
Great, thank you, Sophie. And I'll take another one. Yes, sir, please.
My name is James Friedlander. I'm a private lawyer, having worked with Mr. Eigen and the World Bank about 40-some years ago. Having not read the report, it's a little bit hard to ask proper questions, but I'm interested in two things. One, you've talked about smallholder development, but I'm also interested in commercial farming. Mm-hmm. If you're going to try and feed countries as large as Nigeria and develop it all from smallholder farming, I don't see how that can be done. Secondly, I'd be interested in any comments on SME development as it relates to agriculture, because usually when you think of SMEs, you're only thinking of manufacturing or IT or whatever, and in particular, financing for SMEs. Financing that can be afforded, not banks lending at 20 or 25% to startup companies.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, James.
I'll start with the last one.
Okay.
Let me start with the last one, given the work I have done with AGRA, the Alliance for Green Revolution. I think when we talk of smallholder farming, we are really focused on the reality in Africa today. The food in Africa today is produced by smallholder farmers most of them women. And if you're going to transform agriculture and increase productivity, or even attempt to double production within 5 years, if you don't use this army of smallholder farmers, you are missing an opportunity. And you're also offering employment for quite a lot of people. But we are not insisting on small versus large. There's space for both. There's space for commercial farming, and there's space for smallholder farmers. And in fact, handled properly, this commercial farms can help the smallholder farmers. There have been examples where someone has a large plantation, has a mango plantation of about 500 hectares, and encourages farmers who have a hectare or two to also grow mangoes. He provides them with the seeds. He's doing drip irrigation, offers them that, and buys the produce from them and exports. And off-season, they can grow whatever they want on their farms and keep their money. And so you can really see the synergies that can be exploited. So it's not small versus large. You need both. And particularly if you're going to take advantage of the entire value chain, storage, processing, marketing, and you need each other. On the question of the use of farms, I think you raise an important question. I often tell governments you cannot do transformation or the green revolution with science alone. You need good policies, land use, and you need to protect the smallholder farmers as well. But you also need to have room for creating fairly large farms where the commercial farmers know that the land they are using to be farmed is not going to be questioned later. So you need policies, particularly land, how you use the land and how you lease them. I know there's been a lot of talk about land grabs in Africa, but this is where the governments have to be alert, have the right policies, and protect themselves. On the issue of SMEs, the Alliance for Green Revolution, we created what we call agro-dealers. We've created thousands of them. And these agro-dealers are small-scale businessmen and women who open shops in the villages around the continent. We are mainly in Tanzania, Ghana, Mali, and we are spread into other countries. Their approach is to open small shops in villages away from the capital, where they have they supply the farmers the right seeds, fertilizer, and things that the farmers need, so that they don't have to travel miles on rotten roads to go to the capital or the bigger city to get it, and really facilitate the work of the farmers. And so we appreciate the role of the small-scale farmers, and we've been trying to see what creative means can be used to get them access to financing at decent rates, because in some of the countries, as you say, the interest rates are high. It can be as high as 20%, and there's no way a farmer can borrow at that rate and survive. So there are experiments going on, seeing how one can get them at a special rate. And in Nigeria, for example, the new minister, with the support of the government, is buying the seeds and the fertilizers and distributing it to the farmers directly without middlemen, and making sure they get it at reasonable prices.
Maybe just a quick word. I think it's Henry who referred to capacity building. I think it's very important. It's often irritating. People always say Africa has changed, and I disagree. I say Africans have changed, because Africa actually hasn't changed. The same sky, the same land, the same. That's what it was. It's only Africans who changed, meaning they've changed their behavior. And that comes through education and through capacity building. So if you change the future of Africa, the best lever you have is Africans. So I completely agree with your comment. I think everybody on the panel on the importance of capacity building and helping people take charge. And that's, it's the old image about teaching someone to fish versus giving them a fish. And I think it always applies. Another comment just on funding and financing. So I always hesitate to say this, but insurance is actually very important. I have to take a disclaimer or whatever. But no, I mean really, because what we do in Asia, Prudential, it's exactly that. The only way to transform the savings of the small savers into meaningful sums and to have institutional investors is insurance. Banks don't really do that. Okay? The reason is very simple. It's not philanthropy. It's just that if you're an insurer, take Indonesia. We operate in Indonesia. The money we collect is in Indonesian rupiah. So we can and want only to invest in Indonesian rupiahs. So we're one of a few international players who will invest in the local currency, okay, and not create an FX problem and be willing to invest 20 years in Indonesian rupiah. So when I meet the Minister of Finance of Indonesia, what he wants to talk about is, can you help us with this infrastructure project? Because nobody else will do it. So we're missing a step in Africa by not having a proper insurance industry, because in the financial system, insurance plays an absolutely crucial role in mobilizing resources. People give us $20 a month, but there are millions of them. So we're the first investor in the Jakarta Stock Exchange. We have billions to invest in those economies locally, and we won't take the money out. So anyway, we're just in Ghana for the time being. We're starting, but we have to start close to home. We're all Africans, yeah? So next door. So anyway, we'll watch that space. But I think it's a big part of just deepening the financial system is a big part of the answer to this SME development thing.
Bob, do you want to add? Okay. Okay, I'll take a next round of questions. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Boabradwell. I am the founder and director of the think tank Policy Center for African Peoples, based here in the UK, but which is operating on a Pan-African basis. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Annan for the leadership you are showing in terms of independent thinking, because you are saying things that are normally not said. Now, I believe one of the basic issues that everything that you have said raises is the need for governments that think for themselves instead of following an international agenda. And also, people who have their own action plan independently. What ideas do you and the other panelists have in terms of promoting independent thinking amongst African communities? Because here, for example, we are struggling a lot in terms of a think tank. What is being done is giving money to aid and so on and so on. But a think tank that promotes independent thinking is seen as something that is not done by Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yes, please, Mr. Okri. Ben Okri, thank you for coming, sir. The mic's coming to you.
Which mic?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can. I think it's on. Yeah, are we good?
We
Mic's
can
on?
hear you.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to congratulate you on the Africa Progress Report 2014. It is very, very, very important that we continue these profound structural analysis into the situation of Africa every year. My question is a very, very short one. Is it not about time, just playing the devil's advocate, that we brought back the question of Pan-Africanism?
Right.
Especially given the scale of the problems that Africa faces, and also the small elephant in the room, which is China.
China. Thanks, Ben. Yes, please. So you had your hand up earlier on. Do we have a... Thanks, Tayo. It's okay. Don't run.
We have only one mic.
We have two, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, my name is Odile Hounpatin, and I'm Côte d'Ivoire, and I am an investment banker here in London. So my question is related to finances in Africa. And as Mr. Thiam rightly pointed out, we have a lack of mobilization of finances to direct towards businesses to grow. So we are currently working with a group of four other people on a Pan-African stock exchange that will be based in Mauritius. And my question here will be, would we have the support of the panel present here today in such an initiative? And also the support of the public, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just take one more and then I'll throw it back to the... Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Henri Vincent Akamesan. I'm from Cote d'Ivoire also. I am the CEO of CDR, which stands for Cote d'Ivoire Diaspora Intelligence Agency. We are developing lean management in Africa, and we start in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm also a researcher. My question will be related to the fishery industry, because I'm researching in maritime security. You mentioned corruption. You also mentioned illicit maritime activity. I would just like to share your view on this point, please.
Great, thank you. Bob, do you want to go first on any of those?
I'll deal with the fisheries issue. As Kofi suggested earlier, this report is almost, these are interlinked reports. And last year's one about extractive industries dovetails neatly into extracting wealth from the ocean as well. What's important to remember in almost any discussion about Africa is that anything we talk about immediately impacts ourselves here, but also the rest of the world. And the issue of fishing stocks around the world is of crisis proportions, as we know. There are endless discussions within the European Commission on the subject and elsewhere around the world. But again, given its poverty levels, the ones most impacted are, of course, African people who are the poorest people in the world. And the scale of the organized theft, as Kofi called it, disguised as commerce, is staggering. It's on the west coast of Africa alone, it's $1.8 billion per annum. It is almost impossible for nation states to be able to resist these 40,000, 10,000 ton factory ships that anchor offshore and just sweep up the ocean. And it impacts immediately on local fishermen who can't combat these people in their wooden canoes. In Senegal, 600,000 people are directly or indirectly involved in this industry. And we need to take into account that 2/3 of their dietary protein comes from fish stock. Then you will understand the massive significance of this organized criminality. It takes in also the other things we talked about last year, the tax evasion by major companies. Flags of convenience are really nothing more than tax evasion. It takes into account the ridiculous subsidy regimes, particularly for fuel and insurance, that boat owners can obtain. In fact, I think the subsidies account for 41% of the value of the world's total cash. Now, I don't even know how to begin to deal with this issue, save on a WTO level. Madagascar, which I just whispered to Jan, I said, exactly how big is Madagascar? And I said, the size of the UK, said, it's got to be bigger than that. So we are a panel of experts, you understand.
We're guessing.
Madagascar, this vast island, has got 8 speedboats to deal with its fisheries. This is sad. Recently, some measures have been taken. The Senegalese dealt with corruption at the very highest level, where individuals in the government were issuing contracts to illegal fishing vessels, etc. The report deals pretty exhaustively with this because it was almost the first thing we discussed when we sat down and said, what will what we discuss here, what also is extractive. Certainly the produce growing out of the ground and the produce being sucked out of the sea, where one is inefficient agriculture and can be remedied relatively easily. What will require vast multilateral cooperation is the fisheries issue. And it behooves us to deal with it because we know it can be done. And we know it can be done properly. Iceland is the classic case in point. And Iceland should really maybe look to its laurels. And in as much as they also give development assistance with geothermal activity, which they are also expert in, maybe they should start with Norway, who are very hot on this, start giving expertise and help with coastal states in particular to organise their fisheries better. But one thing is sure, that what is going on is criminal activity. Be under no illusion about this. It's as criminal as the extractives in the Congo or all those other places you read about. And it is impacting immediately and daily on the lives of vast millions of people. And it's harming us because unless we put into place internationally some form of fishing quotas, regulating net size, dealing with these ludicrous subsidies, we'll all be lost.
Yes, unfortunately, Bob has already said what I wanted to say, and I totally agree with him. So let me try to take a slightly different perspective of what we have discussed so far. And this relates also very much to the report which we wrote last year about extractive industries. That is the relationship between the powerful and very often corrupt and not accountable elites in Africa and powerful companies coming from the global north. This relationship permeates all of the issues which we are discussing. I mean, Kofi Annan said earlier that land grab, for instance, should not be bedeviled because there are standards which have been accepted by many people, and if they are applied, then large-scale land tenure can be very useful for agriculture in Africa. Same thing is true in the forest sector. If proper forest management is agreed between the host countries and the investors from very often from the north, but often also from the south or from China, if these arrangements are fair and support inclusive and sustainable development, then this is very important. Forestry can be a source of tremendous wealth. And we said the same thing last year about mining, oil, gas, copper, and other minerals. But that is exactly where the problem comes in, because we have a situation in which, let's remember, the North, the OECD countries were allowed, were subsidized, were supported by their governments in bribing decision makers in the South. Until 1999, everybody thought this is something which one has to live with because there is no global governance. Everybody has to fend for themselves. Therefore, even governments like Germany or the UK or France, they said everybody is bribing, so we cannot stop our own investors going out and bribing the local elites in these countries. So this is where the habit and the acceptance of large-scale bribery comes from. And now we are faced with a situation where a lot has changed. Under the OECD convention, under the UN convention, foreign bribery is now a crime. But many of the relationships still exist. And therefore, it is the question, how can we help to create fair deals? How can we make sure that African people get a fair deal for their natural resources if they have corrupt and unaccountable elites doing secret arrangements with investors, and as long as we have companies from the north who still believe deep down that corruption is something which one simply has to make sure one is not caught. So this is basically why we are recommending a number of common truths for all of these sectors which we have discussed last year and this year. Open and accountable negotiations, capacity building for negotiating good contracts and monitoring these contracts later, fiscal deals, financial arrangements which are open, doing away with companies where the beneficial owners are not known, which of course invites to transfer pricing, and we are dealing with this again here in the fisheries and in the forest sector. So this is, in my opinion, the heart of our recommendations, is to create a arrangement where both the people in the north and the people in the south in Africa held accountable through these various mechanisms which we are proposing. And there's a lot of goodwill, there are a lot of conventions. In my opinion, and I take this from my experience with Transparency International, we need a very powerful role of organized civil society, local civil society. We have one example of domestic, for instance, monitoring of the coastal areas in Africa, I think in Sierra Leone, if I remember that correctly. So this is, in my opinion, one of the mantras which, for me personally, comes out of these two reports, last year's and this year's. If we want to have a fair deal, we want to have sustainable, inclusive development from these riches of the African continent, we have to find a system of global governance which includes the civil society and brings in the private sector and governments, both in the north and in the south.
You raised a question about independent thinking of African government. This report is not prescriptive. We are working on the assumption that the African governments will be taking their own decisions. And in a way, we are indicating areas where there are great prospects that they should look at. And I'm also pleased to see several African countries coming up with a vision statement. Kenya, for example, is working on Kenya 2030, and others are coming up with plans, looking ahead and thinking for themselves. We believe the African governments have the responsibility for all the issues and the development and welfare of the people. International actors can help, but the basic responsibility is ours. And so we are not approaching it with solutions for the African government. I hope they will use this report the way it's intended. And Ben raised a question of Pan-Africanism. I think in the 60s, when we were talking about Pan-Africanism, we were focusing on the political aspects. Today, we are looking at the economic and other issues. I know a leader like Gaddafi wanted an African Union along the lines of the European Union. That, to me, is not realistic. I think what is happening with the regional groupings, SADC, East African Economic Community, ECOWAS, is a good way of beginning to organize intra-African economic cooperation and trade. And if we can build infrastructures, link up our countries by road, rail, and others, to open up and trade amongst ourselves, studies indicate within a decade, we can expand trade by 250, 300 billion. And so we can be practical about it. And you said that, of course, there are new players on the continent. You mentioned China, but we also have India, Brazil, and others are coming. So there are greater prospects for Africa, but we should begin by removing the trade barriers amongst ourselves.
There's a question on China. Anybody want to take the China question? Okay, I'll take a few more. Yes, please.
I'm Claire Lee from the Overseas Development Institute. I work with the G7 Plus group of fragile states. Now, 13 of the 18 G7 Plus members are in sub-Saharan Africa. I wondered if the panel could talk a little bit about the differentiated approach that might be needed to take in fragile states as opposed to non-fragile states. Thank you.
Good, great. And the gentleman next to you.
Ismail Ahmed, founder and CEO of World Remit.
Is that mic working?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes. No, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That's good.
It's pretty simple, it's just one microphone.
Ismail Ahmed, founder and CEO of World Remit, dedicated online money transfer business. I've been running this company for the last 3 years. Originally, it was Africa Remit. we're offering an alternative to Western Union MoneyGram, and I've recently raised $40 million to address the issues you've been discussing. But the biggest
by the issues, you mean the money transfer?
The pricing issues, yes. But the biggest challenge we face in Africa is the exclusivity arrangements. We have managed to capture a market share in Philippines because Philippines government dismantled the illegal practices or anti-monopolistic, anti-competition practices. But in Africa, some countries have tried to dismantle, but they are still, by and large, still there. The only country where we've been able to compete successfully is in Africa is Kenya, thanks to M-Pesa, because Western Union is connected to M-Pesa, we are connected. So we do a large volume to Africa. So should the panel not also call for international agencies such as the World Bank, which did so much under a structural adjustment to dismantle local monopolies, to kind of take the same approach as they have done when they were dismantling the local monopolies in Africa? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a question here as well.
Hi, I'm Tom Minney from African Capital Markets News. Often we see problems about the business climate, whether for private equity or for any sort of investors, local investors or entrepreneurs. But I was wondering, to what extent would the panel say there's a change? Are these issues getting onto the electoral agenda? Can politicians get voted out if they're not delivering on the sort of programs you're mentioning? Because too often we see, a lot of talking at high level, but then politicians go home and, go through the next election quite peacefully.
And I'll take just one more. Yes, and then I think, yes, okay.
Hi, I'm Adrian Klasa. I'm with This is Africa, the Financial Times.
We can't hear you, actually.
Oh, sorry. This is Africa, the Financial Times. You mentioned...
Sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry, if you just say your name again and where
Adrian
you're from.
Klasa?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think you're from This is Africa,
yes,
Financial Times?
the Financial Times,
Thank
there we
you.
go. You mentioned with the issue of access to finance, the fact that rates, especially for smallholders, are often exceedingly high. In terms of how you tackle that, is that a question of regulation for governments? Is that a question of financial institutions changing their practices? And if so, how do you motivate them to do so? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No, let them go.
Okay. Okay, Frank. Thank you. Quickly on access to finance, I think it's both, because as Mr. Ahmed illustrated, if you don't have the right regulation, the supply will not come. I think fundamentally the way companies work is if there is an opportunity to make money, they will find a way to do it. So government has to provide a framework where there is competition, and then companies will come, whether it's M-Pesa, whether it's through mobile, whether it's insurance companies or banks, will go and tap into that demand and meet it. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, but I think you need both. But I think experience is that if you open up the doors, then things will happen. Yeah. Talk about the World Bank. I remember in '95 I was involved in the privatization of telecoms in the Ivory Coast, and the World Bank felt that we didn't need mobile licenses. I always read the success stories about mobiles now with a degree of irony, and we had to fight them to get the free licenses. The rest is history. Free people took them, and they're all billionaires by now. So the real issue, if you set up the right framework, things will happen.
But I think the M-Pesa approach is being picked up widely, and I think you're going to see other systems that will allow that sort of operation. And hopefully if that happens, it will open up things much more and others can participate. Yeah. Because apart from that, there are several groups which are looking at similar platforms. Yeah.
And the commercial law climate, the business climate alters from country to country. I mean, there's 54 states. But if you take Sierra Leone, as soon as they began exporting, or essentially to China, the rate at which you could open or do business, I think, dropped from 60 days to 20 days to begin a company there. And again, once there began to have traction, as Tijan said, then a lot of private money started coming in to Sierra Leone. It also has to do with the the mood of government at that time. They've been burned so often with ridiculous arrangements they've made. For example, going back to the fisheries, often the contracts are absolutely appalling. And several countries have revoked them now, understanding that what they gave away was incalculably valuable. And it's the same with many of the other extractive type deals that were done. At one point, it was the only thing they had to sell. And of course, as everyone's been talking about, elites within those countries took the monies, but other well-meaning people did deals. They didn't truly understand what they were. And that's beginning to change as the whole investment climate gets perkier throughout the continent. And it does go hand in glove with the essential point of this report, which is the thing that is really bothering policymakers throughout the world, the rising inequality. It's not just the argument in the UK. There is a terrible tendency towards this massive gap opening up. Now, you do have the fastest rising middle class in the planet in Africa, which bodes well for business, investment, industry and jobs. But at the same time, 2/3 of the population are in the rural hinterland, and they're hungry, and they earn less than 70 pence a day. And if you want to double the per capita income of those people, then perhaps you'll meet the MDG goal of eliminating poverty by 2030. But it should be relatively easy to double per capita income at 70 pence a day, but it isn't. And so you have these twin problems of trying to get countries to feed themselves so they're not importing huge amounts of food and spending money on doing that, and at the same time creating business investment. And I think you're asking very febrile governments a lot to get it right all the time. Some are doing very well at the moment, some aren't, but you still need massive capacity building within African governments, and they're not getting the help, as Peter pointed out, that is to our benefit to give them. It's not a gift. It really is to our benefit to trade with very rich powers. That's why we fall prostrate before China. You know, it's to our benefit to get this, to help get this place moving. And I come back to this thing that is self-evident, that this continent by 2040 will be a powerhouse. It just can't not be. It's exactly what Tidjane is saying. Give the thing, give the opportunity, and it just takes off. But there needs to be certain frameworks in place. To this gentleman's question there, some there are, some there aren't.
I see that we've just got about 3 minutes left there. So any final comments from the panel? Panel members? No? Mr. Nat?
No. First of all, let me thank all of you for coming. And I think the message is clear that Africa is not poor. It does have riches and resources, human and material. And that if we manage things effectively and we have the right regulatory system in place, both internally and externally, we can do very well. And I'm happy to see that the G8 and G20 are taking the issue of transparency, tax evasion and avoidance very seriously. And I think that will help our continent. But of course, the African governments also need to have the political will and show the leadership required to take advantage of these opportunities and for us to move forward. If the promises that are made are kept, there will be free sharing of information, tax information and all that. But that will not be enough for many African countries. We also need to train the tax experts to take advantage of the material that will be made available. So there's lots of work to do, but there are very, very positive signs. And we count on you to get the word out and to support the efforts of African leaders and Africans to lift themselves out of the situation we are in, or to lift ourselves out. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.